If there is one place the Chinese diving community dreads the most, it is undoubtedly the Jiudun Cenote in Duan, Guangxi. This site has claimed far too many lives. On the surface, it looks like an ordinary, unassuming little pond. But beneath its crystal-clear, deep blue waters lies the deepest cave system in all of Asia, often referred to as the underwater Mount Everest. This cave is like a dark tunnel plunging straight toward the center of the earth, and its true depth remains unknown to this day. The deepest point explored so far is 910 feet, a record set by Han Ting, a legendary figure in Chinese technical diving. Tragically, a short time later, his own life would also be forever lost to those pitch-black waters. On September 26, 2021, three passionate cave divers, Jie, Zi Wei, and Guai, drove to the Jiudun Cenote. All three were students of Han Ting. Their dive plan for the day was straightforward. Jie and Zi Wei would enter the water 10 minutes early. They would descend to a depth of 120 meters to complete some scheduled exploration work. They would then ascend back to the 60-meter mark to rendezvous with Guai, who was acting as their support diver. Finally, all three would complete their decompression stops and surface together. However, the rendezvous time came and went. Guai waited diligently at the support point, but there was no sign of the others. Staring down into the pitch-black abyss, a sinking feeling gnawed at his stomach. According to the plan, Jie and Zi Wei should have returned to the meeting point 15 minutes after their descent, but there wasn't so much as a single bubble rising from below. As time quietly ticked by in agonizing suspense, Guai's own air supply was running dangerously low. With no other choice, he had to begin his decompression and surface. Armed with a terrible premonition, he immediately called for help the moment he broke the surface. While waiting for rescue, he dove back down to the 60-meter mark 2 more times to search, but found nothing. Realizing his teammates were in grave danger, he rushed back up to notify the police. It was 7 p.m. Exactly 1 hour had passed since the two divers had entered the water. Han Ting, who was on a scientific research vessel far away in the South China Sea, was frantic when he heard his two beloved students were missing. With no direct commercial flights available, he paid out of pocket to charter a fishing boat through the night, then caught the earliest possible flight to Guangxi. Simultaneously, elite divers from all over the country rushed to the Jiudun Cenote. A grueling 12-day life-or-death search and rescue operation was about to begin. At dawn on September 27th, another master diver named Hai Tao, who happened to be in Guangxi, was the first to arrive. He and Guai conducted the first search operation. They focused on a secondary cave located 50 meters underwater in the North Cave. They chose this spot because back in 2014, another fatal accident had occurred here, and the underwater currents had swept the deceased diver's body into this exact area. However, their search yielded nothing. Around 9 p.m. that evening, Han Ting finally arrived at the scene. Exhausted from his frantic journey spanning thousands of miles, he didn't risk diving right away. The next morning at 7 a.m., a new wave of search operations began. At that point, Han Ting was the only person on site qualified to search depths beyond 120 meters. They split into two teams. Han Ting took the zone below 120 meters. Hai Tao took the zone between 50 and 100 meters. Rescue diving is one of the most difficult emergency operations in the world. At a depth of 100 meters, every 10 minutes of work requires roughly 3 hours of decompression time. Because of this, they couldn't stay underwater for long. The morning passed, and the search failed again. That afternoon, another rescue team took over, this time entering through the South Cave. Even though the missing divers hadn't entered from there, the team considered factors like strong underground currents and the possibility that the divers had gotten lost. They searched down to 70 meters, but still found nothing. On September 29th, Han Ting and Hai Tao resumed their efforts. They mapped out a highly complex route, entering from the South Cave, focusing on an unexplored connecting section between the South and North Caves, and surfacing in the North Cave. Relying only on hand-drawn maps in an area filled with unmapped water flow lines, this dive was incredibly dangerous. At this point, it is easy to look at a 2D cross-section map of a cave and think it doesn't look too complicated, but that is because we are looking at it from a God's eye view. The actual internal structure of an underwater cave is infinitely more complex. It is tight, pitch black, and filled with a chaotic maze of intersecting horizontal and vertical branches. One wrong turn or a minor equipment malfunction almost guarantees death. This is exactly why cave diving is globally recognized as the absolute pinnacle of extreme sports. The pair's search consumed another 4 hours. Exhausted and back on the surface, they still had no clues. 2 full days had now passed since Jie and Zi Wei disappeared. Rescue teams theorized that the 2 divers likely strayed from the main guideline, wandered into an unexplored branch, and perished, or that they drowned and sank into the deepest, unmapped bowels of the cave. If it was the latter, all rescue efforts would be in vain. After all, no one actually knew how deep the cave truly was. Several underwater robotics companies reached out to the rescue team, offering to provide remotely operated vehicles for free. The team politely declined. Underwater drones are built for open water. The cave's structure was too complex, the tunnels too narrow, and the blind corners too numerous. In such an environment, an ROV is nowhere near as agile as a human diver. Furthermore, these machines cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. If one got stuck or lost, it would be a catastrophic financial loss. Technology wasn't going to save the day. They had to rely on human grit. Just as the search hit a dead end, Han Ting and Haitao remembered a crucial detail. Dong Jie had once mentioned finding a small, suspended rock ledge at a depth of 120 meters. They decided to pivot their search to that area. On October 1st, day 6, the 2 men dove again, aiming straight for the ledge Dong Jie had described. But once underwater, they realized the sheer scale of the challenge. On a map, the area looked small, but in reality, the space was massive. Once a diver leaves the safety of the guideline, it is terrifyingly easy to lose all sense of direction in the endless dark. Since no one knew the exact coordinates of the ledge, Han Ting searched blindly before being forced to return empty-handed once again. Days of continuous deep diving took a heavy toll on Haitao, who developed a severe case of decompression sickness. This meant the entire burden of the search now rested squarely on Han Ting's shoulders. On October 2nd, Han Ting went down alone. He descended to 120 meters to search for the elusive rock ledge, but still found nothing. Running low on breathing gas, he reluctantly began his ascent. But just as he accepted another failed attempt, his eyes were drawn to a small, unassuming shallow alcove on the right wall. They had passed it many times before, dismissing it as just a normal indentation in the rock. This time, however, guided by sheer instinct, Han Ting decided to turn inside and take a look. That single glance revealed a shocking truth. It was a cave within a cave. Squeezing through the narrow entrance, he was met with a 45-degree slope. Swimming up the slope for just a few meters, his headlamp illuminated a scene he would never forget for the rest of his life. Resting silently on a rock at the edge of his light beam was a swollen, waterlogged body. Han Ting instantly recognized him. It was his close friend and prize student Dong Jie, who had been missing for 6 days. It is hard to describe what Han Ting felt in that moment. Later, in an interview about the loss of his friend, the legendary diver, who had long ago made peace with his own mortality, choked back tears. "I have long been mentally prepared that I might not make it back, but it is very hard to be prepared for those around me not making it back." Han Ting pulled Dong Jie's body out of the alcove and slowly brought him up to the 60-meter mark, where support divers were waiting. They moved the body to a decompression point at 50 meters for special handling. Why special handling? Because a sudden decrease in water pressure causes the trapped gases inside a deceased body to expand rapidly. Combined with prolonged submersion, the tissue becomes incredibly fragile. If brought directly to the surface, the body would severely deform or even rupture. That night, a forensic pathologist had to dive down to 50 meters to puncture the body and slowly release the trapped gases, a grueling and complex process. It wasn't until late that night that Dong Jie's body was safely brought to the surface. But where was Zi Wei? The process of venting gases from the first body had severely contaminated the water in the cave, forcing the rescue team to temporarily halt the search. On October 6th, 10 days after the accident, and following a memorial service for Dong Jie, Han Ting and Haitao dove one last time. They headed straight for the hidden side cave where Dong Jie was found. Continuing further up the slope, they soon found Zi Wei's body resting on a rock ledge. The most heartbreaking part was that the 2 divers were found only a few meters apart, yet it took an extra 4 days to locate her. It was a grim testament to just how unimaginably complex the interior of the cave really was. After analyzing the data from their dive computers, experts theorized what happened. On their way back up, the divers likely suffered an equipment failure, severe nitrogen narcosis, or some other unknown emergency. In a state of sheer panic, they strayed off the line, wandered into this hidden, unexplored chamber, and ultimately died when their oxygen ran out. The grueling 10-day rescue had finally come to an end. Facing the cameras afterward, Han Ting, with red eyes, offered a heartbreaking truth. There are always unexpected goodbyes and ruthless partings in this world. This legend of the Chinese diving world had said more than once, almost as if sensing his own destiny. "I have long been mentally prepared that I might not make it back." No one knew then just how prophetic those words would be. Just 2 years after losing his students, Han Ting himself perished in the depths of the Jiudun Cenote, closing the chapter on a generation of diving legends. As for the incident involving Han Ting, I will cover that in a separate video. That concludes today's story. See you in the next video.